Alrighty, if you just want to take your seats. So this is the Autodesk Mudbox presentation. I hope you were all here for the Connect one because that was awesome. And we're about to continue it, basically. Enjoy.
Okay. All right. Welcome back, everyone. Bonjour, guten tag, shalom, salam alaikum, ni hao, sawadee. All right. Good day. Okay, so thank you all for coming back. We're going to go over Mudbox. And what Mudbox is if you... Well, first of all, let me just sort of poll the audience here. How many of you are not familiar with Mudbox? Okay, so most of you. All right, so this will be new. So if you are at all familiar with it, I'm sorry that some of this might seem like review, but it's always good to get a little refresher. So as I said before, when Brenton was introducing all the stuff, is that Mudbox is basically a 3D sculpting and painting solution. What that means is that it's basically virtual clay. All right, so I have these. I bring in a base model, and here I have a base model or base mesh model, kind of the same thing. And this happens to be of my ex-girlfriend's head. And so pretty accurate, I think. But anyway, these parts are used for grabbing my wallet. Anyway, the thing about this is that the base mesh is created in Max, Maya, Softimage, that sort of thing. This does not do, Mudbox, I mean, does not do the roughing out stuff. It doesn't do the geometry creation. It does the sculpting. So it's like the clay came from a different, it came from out of the ground, so to speak, right? Only virtually speaking. This, now what I have, I've got this sort of lump of clay, kind of. And you can see I put a wireframe on it. You can see how it's built. And this has been smoothed a little bit. It's been subdivided into different layers. And I mentioned before, it's kind of like 3D clay plus Photoshop, right? It doesn't compete with Photoshop. It's not. This is a completely different thing. It works with Photoshop very well, but it's not a competing product. But it does work in layers. Everyone's familiar, well, most of you probably are familiar with layers, like within Photoshop, how you can sort of preserve one thing and work on another. Well, it's the same concept. Here we have these different sculpt layers. Let's go ahead and create another one. So I've got one here, and it's like I just want to like kind of cut into this thing a little bit. And it's pretty straightforward. But what I've done is I've created this this change on this layer, but this layer only. So if I turn that off, then it goes away, or I can bring it down. Like just kind of bring down, basically like its opacity, to make it a little bit more subtle. It's not really opacity, it's really intensity. Or I can overdrive it. So put that to 200. You can see that it goes even deeper, right? Okay. So let's put that back down to 0. And then I've got this other layer here, which is unaffected completely. Like I haven't done anything with this one. But let's get more basic with some of the tools. Not just with layers, but just with sculpting in general, and then we'll get into painting. Now let's say I need to kind of flatten this thing out, kind of more like sort of like a cuttlefish. Maybe some of you are familiar with like the Cthulhu mythos, H.P. Lovecraft, any of you? Maybe some of you? Okay. And I don't know what Cthulhu really looks like. I know that he's supposed to have somewhat of a head like this, so I don't know. We'll see how it goes out. So maybe we need to broaden that out like a cuttlefish does, or something like you probably don't remember this, but there was once upon a time a game called Dungeons and Dragons, which was played with which was played on this stuff called paper. These little rectangles had words on them, and you had dice that you rolled. It was before your parents were born. No, not necessarily. But anyway, within Dungeons & Dragons, they had a lot of creatures like this, one of which was called a mind flayer. So a few geeks on the internet are going like, yay, mind flayers. All right, and so they had like much more of a spade-type head. So do I want to sculpt that out? Well, not necessarily. Do I want to smooth it out? No, not necessarily. Maybe I want to grab it and just kind of like, well, that's maybe not big enough, so let's grab it out like this. But we're only doing that to one side. Now, do I want to copy that over to the other side exactly? Well, maybe I do, but well, I didn't really get that exactly symmetrical. Not too bad, but not close enough. So let's undo that. Control Z to undo. Let's go into this grab tool. Go into its fall off. We'll just take a look at its fall off here. Something like that. Change its fall off a bit. And we're also going to turn on its mirror. We're going to mirror in the X plane. or the x-axis, if you will. And then you get something like that. And you can see that it's a little bit sharp on the edges there. Let's undo that. And let's just take down this. So now we've eliminated that sharpness. See how that works? The fall off is like a 3D representation of how that's going to apply the brush stroke or the sculpt tool to those areas. So you can get very elegant looking things. And right now, like I said, I'm just using the grab tool. Actually, it kind of reminds me of the alien from Independence Day a little bit, if you remember that movie. Something like so. Maybe I need to bring it up. Maybe he's got like a larger cranium. I don't know. It's a lot of fun just being able to do this stuff, but there's that problem of like using the right and left hemispheres of the brain. Like the talking is on one side and artistic stuff is on the other side. So if I could just get really quiet all of a sudden, you'll know why. Let's smooth out these edges a bit. Let's bring down our brush size. Smooth that out. And so on. Now maybe if we're working in a team and our boss comes by and says, well, what have you been working on? And they say, well, look, I did this to the head. And they say, well, that looks great, but it's a little too intense. No problem. Tone it down. What about 55%? That's not too bad. What about 0? Like this is what it was before. Work with layers. The layers are your friend. I kind of like that, so I'm going to keep that at 100%. That's with the grab tool and the smooth tool. A lot of these other ones, I'm not going to go through all these, but they're fairly straightforward and they're kind of obvious what they'll do. Grab actually might be a good one to kind of maybe just grab out some points if I really want to get those kind of brow ridges. But I might just want to sculpt that as well. I'm going to sculpt, but not using a stamp image. Let's do this on this on another layer here. Whoops, way too strong. So if you want to give horns, of course you can. Strength, way too high. Bring that down. Still way too high. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not too crazy about that. Let's, I might do something. Actually, let's try foamy instead. Just kind of build up over the top. There we go, something like that. Maybe some of you saw Green Lantern. You have a lot of like the different Green Lantern guys that I forget what those guys are called, but some of them have like weird heads and stuff like that. Maybe I don't want it quite so pointy on top. You can sort of see how I'm creating these little points. Again, consider your fall off. Something like that, but if I make this like really sharp, well, what's going to happen? It's going to be like a needle. See how that creates? Maybe that's something I want. Maybe that's exactly maybe I want these ridges to be like that. All right. And maybe I want to really be able to control my stroke. So I have something called steady stroke here, which you see this little kind of second hand that sort of comes out, this little dial. That allows me to do something, stop, and then kind of just drag it along very predictably. All right, excellent. Something like that. And this is why I really like designing like fantasy type creatures, because you get to be there are really no rules. It just has to look cool. Something like that. It looks a little bit more menacing. Something a little bit more like from the sea. I kind of like that sort of rough edge that I'm giving it a bit. But again, hey, take it down. It's like, well, what if maybe something a little bit more subtle like that? I don't know. But I kind of like that. And I don't know if I'll really worry about the tentacles too much. But now, what if I want to put in some details that are, even finer than that, and something that's maybe more according to an image or something like that? Well, we can do this as well. If I put on sculpt once again, and let's take a look at, say, some of our stencils. Now, I can take this, which is a, I think elephant skin. I'm not sure. And I can sculpt that in as well, but once again, that's too high. Let's put that down, brush size up, strength down. Get this area over here. Pretty awesome, eh? Something like that. Maybe it's not so strong up on the edges a bit. And let's turn that off. And let's just take that down a bit. It doesn't need to be quite so strong. I don't know if there's an easier way to sculpt and no clay on your fingers, it's great. So moving forward, let's see what else we can do with this. By the way, these can be any sort of image that you might like. Let's see, which one's this one? So some wood paneling. We've got some stone. We've got this one for like metal plating, stuff like that. And also you can do it with stamps as well. Stamps and stencils are two different things, just in the same way that a stamp in physical space, you know, you stamp it out, and a stencil is something that you put up against something and spray it on, right? Same sort of thing. So with stamps, okay, let's turn that off, and then put on a stamp of some kind. Let's say, I don't know. Let's say this one. I'm going to do this on a new layer so I don't ruin any of my previous work. And you can see that I'm, instead of painting, you know, according to a stencil that's, you know, sort of stuck to my camera, now I've got the stamp that it kind of goes where I want it to go. Now let's undo that. And I'm going to put on randomize, and I'll make it a little bit bigger. And what's cool about all this is that not only is it all on layers, but I can also reverse the brush properties. What I mean by that is, for example, if let's bring this down, and let's bring my strength up. See how that creates, you know, a raised pattern? All right. Now I'm going to hit the Control key. See how it digs instead? All right, so let's do a smooth one, just to prove the point. Let's make it a little bit bigger, just to something like that. So it's definitely raised out. Then hit the Control key, and that digs. So I'm reversed the property of the brush. So let's undo those. Actually, come to think of it, maybe I want some like nice veins or something like that in the head, or the neck rather. So would that be right? Or maybe I want to do it like with wax. Waxy's kind of an interesting one because it just sort of puts on like a thin layer over the top. Maybe that's a little thick, so let's bring that down a bit. Excuse me. Turn off our stamp spacing, turn on our steady stroke. Something like that. You might find that that's a little bit too extreme on the edges. You know, it's like, well, veins don't really just stop like that. Well, maybe we want to smooth that out. Smooth that out. Just kind of soften it up a bit. Maybe just a bit there. A bit right there. And so on. Is this making sense so far to everyone? Yes? Okay. I have to commend you all on some very intelligent questions in that last session while I'm thinking of it. Brendan was quite right that those are questions that are better than what we get from most professionals. So they will definitely have to compete with you guys in the future, very near future, I think, which is good. Anyway, so there's so those are some of the brushes there. Also, some things like scrape. You know, if I just want to sort of scrape across things. Whoops, let's turn that. So when you scrape, you can sort of see what's happening. It's like scraping a knife across. So it's kind of like erasing that detail, which sometimes you want and sometimes you don't. Fill sort of fills the gaps. You know, you can sort of see how it's kind of filling up those lower areas. By the way, I could work with how much higher resolution, but it would slow down a little bit. Foamy, something like that, which we already kind of used that one a bit. Now, what's really cool is our vector displacement maps. Won't really get into exactly what they are because it's kind of a long explanation. But basically, they deform your geometry in a way that your normal brushes and sculpt tools can't do. So a vector displacement map, for example. So let's put that there. Let's not randomize that, and let's turn up our strength really high. So let's say that I want a brain, like a sort of a effect. So like so, maybe not quite as strong. See how it like really kind of creates that sort of brain matter-like, I don't know, substance. I don't know what kind of creature evolves to have its brain on the outside, but, it's a fantasy creature. It doesn't matter. There's like a rhyme and reason, like how the brain is worked out in mammals anyway, probably all vertebrates. Damned if I know what it is, but there's some kind of logic to it. I probably should have like a photograph of a brain to work with, but doesn't matter. And let's just tone that one down because it's a bit extreme. Something like that, just so we see it poke through the skull a bit. All right, so let's take a look at some of the materials. Now we have a bunch of material presets which we can use if we want to make this thing look more like porcelain or more like rubber or like white plastic, shiny, whatever. More like rubber, more like chrome. And if I go into here, into its let's see, go into its material values. Let's make this a little bit more glossy. Let's see, I don't know if this has a bump. Let's say shadow. Maybe it's on this one. Oh, it's actually requiring a specular mask. Oh, that's why, because I know what I did. Ha ha ha. I forgot that I have already have a specular mask on there. So if I turn on my specularity, you can see that it gets a little bit more shiny. It's like apparent to everyone. And of course, we can tone that down so it becomes dull or it becomes very shiny. Reflection mask, there's whoops. We could put that on as well. So let's get into how we can paint this and make it look a little bit more realistic. So paintbrush, and we're just going to create a new layer. In this case, I will do this with a diffuse. Diffuse is your color, basically. And if I want to do something really, really simply, just like paint white, sure, of course I can. There's my color right there. I can also use, like anything before, I can use my stamps and stencils. All right, so let's just use a stencil really quick with a projection. So I can either paint that on directly if I want. Probably not. Probably don't want metal directly on my creature. Or I can use these different brushes that I have, stamps that I have rather, and or anything that I have a picture of. Again, any sort of JPEG or whatever will do. So grab something from the net, or make something in Photoshop. Take a picture with your phone, and you can use that to color things. So let's go ahead, and this is just a leaf, leaf texture that we have here, and you can see that I'm applying it. But there's a whoops. But you can see that there's a randomize on there. Let's take off that randomize, and you can see that it's just creating like a streak, right? Let's turn on randomize, do the same stroke over again, and it's randomizing as it's putting it down. Much different effects. And you'd be surprised at like what you can use and what works. I mean, this is leaves, but is it working for this thing's skin? Well, I don't know. It's you be the judge, but I don't really particularly think so. But you might disagree. Maybe you want something more like More like this. Oh, by the way, it also goes according to the color. Your stamp, usually, it will go by the according to the color of the stamp. Is how should I say? Is tied to the color of the tool. So if I change that to, let's hold on, put that to paintbrush instead, and put that to say something really obvious. We'll keep that on white. Even though the color is white, but we see that color reflected in the or being displayed of the stamp. However, if we put this to say deep red, same texture, but with a different hue, right? Does that make sense to everybody? So you can flavor, so white to dark, that's just your lightness and darkness, right? And then, which makes sense. And then you have your actual colors, which tell you what you're going to get as far as the hue. All right, so just to undo those a bit. I had one of like brain coral or something like that. Oh, here it is. There we go. Maybe that looks a little bit more appropriate. I don't know. Something like so. I don't know. Don't want to spend too much time on it. But then we can also change the, say if I go into my specularity mask and go back to my color, make it black. So I want to have some parts really really shiny, other parts really dull. I can do that as well. Let's take my brush size down. See how I'm actually painting out the specularity? Now it's no longer shiny on this area. It's a little bit hard to see, but it is happening. So let's undo that and do it one more time. In fact, let's paint it white, and you'll see what it looks like when it's really shiny. So now you can really see the difference. And I can also hold it still, and if I just move around my L key for the light, L drag, you really see how shiny it is there. And then put it, maybe I want it to be a little bit more dull. Something like that. So these are all different passes. All of these can be exported out to Photoshop for further improvement, or imported from Photoshop if you want. Let's take a look and see what this guy would look like if he was if he had Chrome. There we go. Look a little bit. Oh. And of course we can adjust this further if we want. And any number of other things, like sort of a, I don't know what this one is, kind of more of a rubber, or kind of, I don't know, it's almost sort of like a weird X-ray effect. It looks kind of strange. But anyway, you've got a lot of different options available to you, and all this like plugs in. If you take a look, we've got this where we can send directly to Maya, send to 3ds Max, send to Softimage. We can export the screen to PSD, so we can bring this into Photoshop if we want. We can import our masks if we in our layers. We can export those out separately to Photoshop if we want, and import them as well. So you can see that import channel from PSD. We can blend the different. You might be familiar with these blend modes between the different layers. Work exactly the same way as they do in Photoshop. So there's a lot of interoperability between Photoshop and Mudbox. A lot of similar tools, for example, like dry brush and blur and things like that. So again, let's see if I just, let me paint something with a little bit of definition here. Like something like that. I don't know. Nothing particularly special, but if I want to kind of blur that out, and increase that strength. Or does it look really sharp right there? I know that's a little subtle. You'll probably be able to see it here. Blur that out a bit, maybe. I can sponge that up if I want. I can change the contrast. I can burn it, dodge. These are all like pretty standard tools, really. Erase the paint if I want. Really excellent for doing tattoos and all kinds of things. And as I said before, you can always adjust the layers. Bring them up, bring them down, whatever you want to do. I can also pose things. This is a fairly new feature. Let's just create a joint here. And let's go ahead and drag that out. So something like that. Let's create another joint. Whoops. Put it there. I should have put this on a separate sculpt layer, but that's all right. Pose that out right there. Looks kind of creepy, doesn't it? So we can put these on separate layers if we want to really kind of make this thing more gnarly. And also maybe you want to just pose things out or make things bulged out for like muscles or for veins in the neck and things like that. Do you want to do that with textures? Do you want to do it with sculpt with sculpt layers? I don't know. It just depends on what you want to do. Let's undo that. Undo that. Undo that. Let's go over there. Yeah, it's just really, really straightforward. You can paint directly on the UVs as well. Here's the UVs that we have that are laid out. If you don't know what UVs are, that's part of another broader discussion, but we can talk about that at length if you wish. So at this time, oh, it's telling me save, save, save. It's like really likes to panic. That's my save button, if you can't see that up there. But at this time, I'll just open it up to questions. And got a couple. All right, front and center. Do we have some microphones as well? Saves me from having to repeat them. So can we just get that one in the front, just so because yeah, well, there we go. Only because I promised that one first. All right. Thanks.
With the UV map.
Yep.
I don't really know how to go around and explain this. I've heard of the diffuse, just the channels of it. Could you possibly explain the basics of the UV map channels? Okay,
UV maps. What UV mapping is? It's not so much. It's not a texture channel so much as it is a map of how the textures will be applied to the creature itself. What I mean by that is you know how you have like different types of projections for a globe, like a Mercatus, because there's different ways. If you unwrap a sphere, it looks a certain way. Like you get like different distortions and things like that. Like Greenland always looks really, really huge in certain maps because it's been unwrapped, and with that unwrapping, you get a certain amount of distortion. All right. So imagine any sort of object, like say like a bear. Now imagine a bear skin rug. It's flattened out. Okay. You can't really paint on something that's sort of, that's completely disorganized. I mean, I guess there are some exceptions to that, but you really want to you want your UVs, what they're called, UVWs. All that means is that U's go one way, V's go another way, and they're coordinates. It's a coordinate system. So if you look here, this is the UV view for this creature. Now you say, well, there's a similarity, but they're not exactly the same. So let's take a look at one of these tentacles. All right, so we have that there. Let's go to the UV view. Now let's. I'm just going to paint on here with some black, just one little streak, one right like that. Now if we look at that UV view, see what's happened? See that black right there? All right, so even though I've painted on the 3D, I've actually just really the whole time I've always just painted on a two-dimensional map. That's going to be reapplied onto the character. Does that sort of make sense? All right, so the process, UV unwrapping, is taking your model. It's basically like skinning an animal. Again, I hate to be crude, but that's basically what it is. Not necessarily an animal. It could be a box. Has anyone ever made like a box like out of a piece of paper? You have like a cross-shaped piece of paper that you fold in. Exact same concept, only it's unfolding it out, drawing it, and then inside the software it reassembles it. That's UVs. That's what that's all about. All right, I have one over here. Okay.
Clearly you don't start with a giant alien thing. When you first start a new project, what does it look like? Is it just like a sphere sort of thing, or what is it?
Every sculptor and every modeler has a different. Well, sculpting is a subset of modeling, but every modeler has a different set of techniques. Some will start off with a cube. Some will start off with a sphere. Some will start off with just geometry that some with just lines. There's something called lofting in Maya or skinning in, or is it called skinning? I can't remember exactly. In Softimage, and anyway, the same tool exists in lots of different softwares. That's basically where you take a line, from here to here, and then another one here and here and here, and then you basically skin across them all. Like so, you'd make it's almost like the ribs on a boat. All right, so you can do it that way. So you can start from things that are very, very simple as lines and almost as simple as points, really, or something a little bit more complicated like shapes. But this creature in particular, I didn't start this. I didn't, my thanks goes out to a gentleman named Dave King, who's a real master with this. He was generous enough to donate this model for us. My guess is that this probably started off as a cube, but I can't rightly say. However, we can kind of get a little bit better look. If we go a page down, we're going back to its more simple forms. So this is the base mesh by itself with nothing really done to it. Other than some of the changes that have been made within, obviously, Max or Maya. So you can see that's very simple. If I turn on the wireframe, you can see how simple it actually is. Let's change that so it looks a little bit more normal. There we go. Okay. Yep.
Just a couple questions. For the layers, do they actually stay applied to the model when you export it to, say, as an FBX?
They can,
yeah,
sure.
So
you can do it both ways.
Okay, cool, excellent. Does this directly import into game engines such as Unreal, or do you have to export it to Maya or Max and then export it again over?
You can have a rigged character within. Now, it's not an animation tool. This doesn't do animations. So while you can export out an FBX. You wouldn't want to. This is not this is not the end of the line for the model before it goes into the game engine. I guess in theory you could, but in general, you might do that with props perhaps, like you've a crate, a hammer, a gun, or something like that. But for characters, probably not. You'd want to bring that back into Max or Maya.
Yeah, and I presume this program is mainly designed for character modeling too. It's not more for props or anything else like that.
Primarily organic. Well, look, anything that you can do with clay, you can do here. Automotive folks have been using this a lot, and because you think, gosh, automotive, what do they have to do with characters? Well, in traditional automotive design, they were sculpting clay. So if you can sculpt, in fact, actually, if we say new scene here. One of the models that we have here is just a default car that you can sort of goof around with, right? And that's fine for some people. Now, if you want to have things with a lot of sharp edges, it's not really ideal for that. But yeah, organic shapes, trees, rocks, characters, creatures, that kind of thing.
All right, cool.
Primarily.
Yeah. Last thing in a bit. So I guess you can. But if you can't get sharp edges, I guess you could export it to Max and Maya and then give sharp edges?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, look, it's with any one of these questions, almost always the answer is either yes with an if or no with a but.
Right.
In other words, that yeah, you can totally bring this in. And now, if you're doing, say, architecture, let's say, is anyone familiar with the Parthenon in Athens? All right, kind of a famous building. Anyway, so if you were doing that, you would want to do all your all the fluted columns and all that sort of thing done in Max or Maya. But for the what is that the thing called? It's not the frieze. It's not the portico. I can't remember. Anyway, the main the sculpture at the top of the you'd probably want to do that in Mudbox because those are very much like organic characters. They're not moving, but they're all sort of sculpted out. Yeah. So it's a blend between the two. Now, with Mudbox, though, you want to do that with individual assets. All right, so it's not so much that you don't bring in your entire scene just to sculpt one little flower. You bring in just the flower and you sculpt that out, and then bring that back out into Max or Maya or Soft.
Cool.
Make sense?
Yep. And one thing before I hand it over, poly count. What's the expected poly count per model, etc.?
Expected poly count, it really depends. Look, it's hardware dependent. So the better hardware you have, the better off you're going to be. I have seen on a much better system than what I have here. I've seen characters in the hundreds of millions of polygons. That is not a game asset. If you create a game asset with hundreds of millions of polygons, you're not going to be in games very long. Maybe as a base, maybe as a rough guide from which you will derive much lower resolution characters, but not as the. But anyway, anywhere from something very, very simple to a few hundred polygons to something where a few thousand or a few maybe tens of millions. But for games, probably just in the tens of thousands of area.
How difficult would it be to add like entirely new shapes, like say eyeballs, to the creature that you had over there before?
Not hard at all. It all depends on what. For example, if I had the let's see, if I just go do a new scene, I can always import things over the top. So I've got a basic head here, and I wanted to bring in an eyeball. This is just as an example. I can always import a. Well, I guess I can just bring that thing back in, I suppose. There it is. It's up there. So I've got two different models in the same zone. Now I might need to scale something down if I wanted to have this thing look like it's his hat or something like that, or bring in eyeballs. I can bring in spheres or whatever. Really simple.
All right,
You
thanks.
you can integrate all kinds of things from different scenes. In other words.
I was wondering, do you always have to start from scratch, or can you pull in something like, for that, would you be able to pull in a basic, like a regular squid and then expand on it from there?
Yeah.
Or would you have to start from scratch, build the squid, and then change it?
Look, anything that you can bring in, whether it's a cube or a flat plane. For example, I mean, you can bring in a flat plane. Something as simple as that. And you can start to sculpt this out if I want. If I want to make like terrain, right? Or actually it looks kind of more like that brain stuff that I was doing before. But I can do something really, really simple like that. Or anything to more involved, crazy geometry. If it comes in as an OBJ object file, or an FBX, yeah, chances are you can bring it in. There are some restrictions, however. If it's not built correctly, like there aren't like too many like there are certain errors that you run into with certain models. That gets into a whole other discussion of like what's a proper model and not. But assuming that it is built correctly, yeah, you can bring it in and you can make it as crazy as you want.
Could you also begin building something in clay and like take a picture or something
Scan it?
with it?
Sure, yeah.
And then import it in?
Yep.
Or
yeah.
even scan a face?
Yeah, you can. There are different. Again, if you can capture, for example, the Kinect, which I still have here, it will do a crude capture. It's very rough, but you can use that sort of as a base from which you can sculpt, as a kind of as a diagram. So sure, yeah, there are lots of different ways that you can bring in scan data. That's there's all kinds of hardware that will do that stuff for you. But yeah, if you want to bring it in and clean it up, add give horns to yourself or whatever, then sure, theoretically, yeah.
Thank you.
How did you do the holes in the model like with the eye sockets and how you had the void at the bottom of the head?
Okay. So those were done prior to the model being exported out. Those were done in Max or Maya, and it's just deleting out polygons. Just select an area, delete them out. However, you can also paint out certain things. Now, the geometry is still there. It's just painted with transparency. So if I have this here, and I go over to my paint tools, paintbrush, click that. I'm going to put this on the opacity layer, like so. Let's turn off my... now you can see that, you can still sort of see that specular highlight. So let's go over here to that, and turn my specular to black. There you go. So you can see what I've done. It's like I've just sort of painted out that area. Now it doesn't mean that it's if I turn on my frame, my frame. What am I saying? My wire frame. You can still see that it still exists. I haven't actually punched out a hole. It's an illusion. I've just created some transparency. But in the case of that squid character with its eyes, those were actually cut out in Max or Maya or Soft. Yep, over here.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, you've shown us those brushes there, but can you, like Photoshop, can you download more brushes and import more brushes? Or are we sort of restricted to the brushes you've got there?
Now,
and if so, where would you get brushes from?
Okay, so on the whole, yes and no. You are restricted to these types of brushes, but any one of these brushes can be adapted for stamps and stencils, and their fall off can also be altered. Let me show you an example here. So even though it's like, well, you're only using a sculpt brush. Well, yeah, I am. However, if I'm using a sculpt brush, I've got all kinds of ways that I can create new. Fall offs. So these have different behaviors, right? I can use different stamps, which means that it's that it's stamping or sculpting out a different way, and with vector displacement maps. Now, I can't show you the community because I'm not online, but there's a Mudbox community. You've got a button that takes you to the Mudbox community, and they have all kinds of different examples of, or you can build your own. Any one of these stamps or stencils, these are just images. They're just images, And for sculpting, it's black and white. All right, grayscale. That's what it's going to pay attention to, or that grayscale. However, with vector displacement maps, which you can sort of see these little colored. I know those are hard to see, but those are actually using colored information to sculpt geometry in interesting ways. To give it sort of like a 3D sort of sculpt effect. With regards to those, that's a little bit more complicated process of how you extract those out. I would just refer you to the Mudbox community. If you just go onto Google, type in Mudbox community, Autodesk or something like that, you'll find all kinds of resources there. And they give you tutorials and examples and all kinds of stuff right there. I'm sorry to be so vague, but it's part of a greater discussion, I think, as is many cases. Is that it? Pretty much done. Okay, well, thank you once again for your precious time. And if you have any further questions, come see me.
Awesome. Well, that was Autodesk. Give the guys a hand. They were here last year. They're here again. And so we did have one guy from last year who did it. Maybe if you guys do something, you may be able to do something like Hagen yesterday and actually present it yourself. Now, it is pretty much free time / tournament time, so the games will be going shortly. But to tell you what tournaments are being played where, at least according to my sheet, down in the Rotunda, we have Rotunda 1 being, once again, handheld tournaments. So if you bought PSPs and DSs, check that out. Smash Brothers Brawl in Rotunda 2. Rotunda 3, Madman is screening anime once again. So if you just want to chill out and talk, that may be your best place to do it. NBA Jam is in Rotunda 4. Marvel vs. Capcom is in Rotunda 5. I think Rotunda 7's got Halo 3 ODST. The Retro Challenge has actually been brought into here. It was going to be Mario Kart 64, but it's going to be Power Stone 2 instead. So for those who want to be a Dreamcast action, check that out. We've also got the main areas once again, down in the PC areas, so check that out as well. Otherwise, have fun, guys. It's pretty much free time to do what you want. Play some games. Enjoy yourselves. Check out Autodesk as well.